Hello, everyone. I would say Merry Christmas, but I'm not sure I can say those words because I've been hearing that Christmas is pagan. This leads to an interesting question. What's more pagan, Christmas or the Kaba? Is one more pagan than the other? That's what we're here to discuss. And I'm here with Mike Jones of Inspiring Philosophy. Mike, we've got Christmas, Santa Claus. We're talking elves. We're talking reindeer. We're talking stuff going on up at the North Pole, bringing presents. We're talking Christmas trees, people bowing down just to get under the Christmas tree to get their reward from their pagan tree. What's going on with all of this? How is this not pagan?
Yeah, none of this is pagan. Let's start with the date. It seems as though early Christians believed that Jesus was going to die on the same day he was conceived. They believed he died on March 25th, so that means he was also conceived on that day in their minds. So you just count forward 9 months, you get December 25th. That's where the date comes from. No evidence of a pagan festival on that date prior to the rise of Christianity under Constantine. So people will say Saturnalia was a Roman holiday. That was on December 17th, never lasted to December 25th, according to early sources like Macrobius and others. Some will say there was a sun holiday called Sol Invictus on December 25th. No evidence for that either. It seems as though the earliest source that mentions Sol Invictus on that date was the calendar of Philocalus, which dates to 354 AD, which is post-Constantine. So I've argued that it's probably more likely that after the rise and prominence of Christianity, pagans started using that date to celebrate pagan worship to compete with the rise of Christianity and their use of December 25th for that date for Christmas. You mentioned Christmas trees. They don't go back to paganism either. The earliest source that mentions them comes from 1419 in modern day Germany. This is in Bernd Brunner's book, Inventing the Christmas Tree. And either they came from maypoles, which was, again, another European folk tradition, or they came from the use of paradise trees, because on December 24th, they would celebrate the feast day of Adam and Eve with an Adam and Eve play. And they would decorate a pine tree with apples to help celebrate the day and to perform the play. So a lot of scholars think the paradise tree and those clearly very Christian plays morphed into the Christmas trees. Use of Santa Claus clearly comes from St. Nicholas. He was a Catholic saint. But in about the early 1800s in New York, a lot of Dutch immigrants wanted to morph him into a Christmas figure. So they rebranded him to look more like the tradition. They rebranded him to look in the traditional attire of a Dutchman from that time, which is why he's in a big red suit. And then it started to take off because of writers like Clement Moore, Thomas Nash. So that's also Christian in origin. It was just morphed through the imagination of Dutch immigrants in New York, and it just slowly evolved into the Santa Claus traditions we have today. I've gone through every prominent Christmas tradition in a video called The Top 10 Christmas Traditions and Their Origin. I can find no evidence any of them go back to paganism, whether it's stockings, mistletoe, reindeer, Yule logs even. No evidence these go back to paganism. So at the end of the day, Christmas is entirely Christian in origin with some European folk traditions added in.
Well, I guess I was wrong. Christmas doesn't sound pagan at all. And that's good news because there's still time to buy Christmas presents. But you don't need to wait until the last minute running from store to store like a maniac. Artza has you covered. Artza has launched their brand new Christmas box called Nativity Night, and you definitely want this for a friend or loved one. Each item in your Artza box is handmade by local artisans and small family businesses in places like Nazareth and Jerusalem and Bethlehem. So when you sign up with Artza, you're blessing and supporting these artisans and families while bringing the land of the Bible right into your home or someone else's home. Inside, there's an awesome hand-painted ceramic plate depicting the night of the Nativity, delicious foods and spices, a hand-carved olive wood nativity ornament from Bethlehem, and other handcrafted treasures that bring the story of Christmas to life. So help a friend or loved one experience Christmas this year with a box of gifts straight from the land where Jesus walked. They're only selling this box for a few more days, and it's almost sold out. Plus, they just increased our discount. You'll get 15% off with the promo code BIZZLE. So this is the perfect gift to celebrate Christmas and share the beauty of the Holy Land with your loved ones. Click the link and sign up today. Now, back to Christmas versus the Kaba. We thought Christmas was pagan, but it turned out not to be pagan. Maybe we think the Kaba is pagan, but it's actually not. What are your thoughts?
Well, I've been told by Muslims that this was built by Abraham, even though it's not mentioned in Genesis. So how could it be pagan if it was built by a strict monotheist?
Yeah, it's interesting how Islam got a lot of its beliefs. When you look at what Islam teaches, it's as if Muhammad just took almost everything that was popular around him at his time in 7th century Arabia and rolled it up into a big ball. You've got various elements of Jewish monotheism and teachings from the Talmud. They end up in the Quran. You've got Christians and even heretical Christians with some weird sources, and these stories end up in the Quran. And then you have the various pagan practices and beliefs and so on. They end up as part of Islam. So it shouldn't be surprising when we check out their Hajj rituals and the Kaaba and we find this saturated in paganism, because the Kaaba was a site of pagan worship. And this isn't according to me, this is according to Muslim sources. Sahih al-Bukhari, 2478, narrated Abdullah ibn Masud, the Prophet entered Mecca, and at that time there were 360 idols around the Kaaba. He started stabbing the idols with a stick he had in his hand and reciting, "And say truth," i.e. Islamic monotheism or this Quran or jihad against polytheists, has come, and batil, falsehood, i.e. Satan or polytheism, has vanished. This is when Muhammad took control of the Kaaba. But think about this. Why would they want to take control of a site that was a center of pagan worship? Why would you want a pagan shrine as your center of worship? Especially when we know that before they started facing the Kaaba for their worship, they were facing the temple in Jerusalem. They're facing the temple in Jerusalem. That was their Qibla before the Kaaba became their Qibla. So they understood Jews are the monotheists and their site is in Jerusalem, so Muslims would pray facing Jerusalem too, to copy the Jews. Interestingly, Muhammad thought that the Jews were going to accept him as a prophet. They rejected him as an obvious false prophet, and that's when Allah suddenly changed his mind about where Muslims were supposed to face when they pray. And here's what we find in Surah 2, verse 144 of the Quran. Allah says, "We see the turning of thy face for guidance to the heavens. Now shall we turn thee to a Qibla that shall please thee," talking to Muhammad. "Turn then thy face in the direction of the sacred mosque. Wherever ye are, turn your faces in that direction. The people of the book know well that this is the truth from their Lord, nor is God unmindful of what they do." So Allah's goal in changing the Qibla from Jerusalem to Mecca was to please Muhammad. It's weird how so many things in this religion are just Allah trying to please Muhammad. But think about this. Why would changing from facing Jerusalem to facing a pagan center of worship be pleasing to Muhammad? Well, two main reasons. One, the Jews rejected him, and so, I'm not going to face Jerusalem anymore. That'll teach you guys. And second, these guys all grew up. The pagans, the polytheists, grew up with the Kaaba as their center of worship. So it was very normal to them. This was normal to them. It just felt right. But you have an issue. How can you justify, how can you make sense of the idea of changing your direction of prayer from Jerusalem to a pagan center of worship? How does that work? Well, just a little earlier in Surah 2, verse 127, Allah declared that the Kaaba was built by Abraham and Ishmael. Now that's interesting. If it was built by Abraham and Ishmael, and if the Muslims knew this, why were they facing Jerusalem? They've got a shrine built by Abraham and Ishmael right there. Why weren't they facing that all along? It really seems like Muhammad's just inventing this as he goes along. But what evidence do we have that the Kaba was built by Abraham and Ishmael? Are you aware of any?
I am not aware of any evidence, no.
The only evidence is Muhammad said it. And that's good enough for Muslims usually. It can't be good enough for us because we know this guy had absolutely no clue what he was talking about on various issues. Here's an example. Sahih al-Bukhari 3366. Narrated Abu Dar. I said, O Allah's Messenger, which mosque was first built on the surface of the earth? He said, Al-Masjid al-Haram at Mecca. I said, which was built next? He replied, Al-Masjid al-Aqsa at Jerusalem. I said, what was the period of construction between the two? He said, 40 years. Are you catching this? According to Muhammad, there was a 40-year gap between the construction of the Kaba and the temple in Jerusalem. Now, this is interesting because according to them, the Kaba is built by Abraham and Ishmael. The temple in Jerusalem was built by Solomon in the 10th century BC, more than 1,000 years before Abraham. According to Muhammad, Abraham and Solomon are 40 years apart. Okay, you're already dealing with someone who has absolutely no clue what he's talking about. So why should we believe this guy when he says anything? And if Muhammad doesn't actually know his history and he's getting things wrong and making things up as he goes along, well, guess what? Apart from his word, we have no evidence at all that the Kaaba was ever associated with Abraham and Ishmael. And yet we have Muslims today that take the pilgrimage there because they think it's what Muhammad said it is. They walk circles around the Kaaba. By the way, do you know why Muslims walk 7 times around the Kaaba? They don't either. But we know why the pagans walked 7 times around the Kaaba. It was to honor the 7 planetary deities. They noticed that there were 7 heavenly bodies that they were aware of that moved differently from the stars. They were aware of the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And they associated each of those heavenly bodies with a different pagan god. And to honor each of these pagan gods, they walked circles around the Kaaba like these bodies circled the earth. That's why they did it. Muslims kept the same practice, but they don't realize where it comes from. They just keep doing the same things based on what they're taught. So this is as pagan as paganism gets, and now it's one of the 5 pillars of Islam.
But let me guess. If it looks like paganism, walks like paganism, and talks like paganism, it must be pure monotheism in disguise.
You're exactly right, Mike. And when Muslims visit the Kaaba, they do everything they can to kiss the black stone, which is interesting because stone worship was a standard feature in pagan Arabia, as we read in Sahih al-Bukhari 4376, narrated Abu Raja al-Utaridi, we used to worship stones, and when we found a better stone than the first one, we would throw the first one and take the latter. But if we could not get a stone, then we would collect some earth, i.e. soil, and then bring a sheep and milk that sheep over it and perform the tawaf, that's what Muslims do today, around it. What did the pagans worship? A stone. And when they found a better stone, they would replace that stone with the new stone and worship the new stone. Where does this end? When you find the best stone. Once you have the best stone to worship, then you just worship that stone. And so they end up with the black stone of Mecca. And, I mean, it's like they're saying, hey, we want to do everything that the pagans are doing, but somehow it's not pagan when we do it. Interesting stuff. And what's amazing is that Muhammad's companions would even recognize that this really seems pagan, and we got a problem with this, but since we saw Muhammad doing it, we have to do it too. In Sahih al-Bukhari 1597, we read, narrated Abbas bin Rabi'a, Umar came near the black stone and kissed it and said, no doubt I know that you are a stone and can neither harm anyone nor benefit anyone. Had I not seen Allah's messenger kissing you, I would not have kissed you. This is Umar, the second of the rightly guided caliphs, saying he knows he shouldn't be kissing a pagan idol like the black stone, but he had to do it just because Muhammad said. And there's more. Muslims run between the hills of Safa and Marwa, But we know the pagans ran between these two hills as well because they had two pagan idols there. Yusuf Ali comments on Surah 2, verse 158 of the Quran, "The virtue of patient perseverance in faith leads to the mention of two symbolic monuments of that virtue. These are the two hills of Safa and Marwa, now absorbed in the city of Mecca and close to the well of Zamzam. Here, according to tradition, the lady Hagar, mother of the infant Ismail, prayed for water in the parched desert, and in her eager quest round these hills, she found her prayer answered and saw the Zamzam spring. Unfortunately, the pagan Arabs had placed a male and a female idol there, and their gross and superstitious rites caused offense to the early Muslims." So we know, and they knew, that this was a pagan ritual performed by pagans for their idols. What evidence do we have that this had anything to do with Hagar and Ishmael? Absolutely none. All we have is Muhammad said it. But keep in mind, Muhammad is the same guy who thought that Abraham and Solomon lived 40 years apart. He apparently makes things up as he goes along to take elements of paganism and bring them into his religion by saying, oh, this was from Abraham, this was from Hagar, based only on his word, and he had no clue what he was talking about. But interestingly, we know that even Muhammad's companions understood that this is just a pagan practice. Sahih al-Bukhari, 3847. Narrated Ibn Abbas, to run along the valley between two green pillars of As-Safa and Al-Marwa mountains was not sunnah, but the people in the pre-Islamic period of ignorance used to run along it and used to say, we do not cross this rain stream except running in great haste. Now this is devastating to Islam because Ibn Abbas says that this practice was just a pagan practice. It wasn't part of the sunnah of Muhammad. Notice the commentary at the bottom. This statement of Ibn Abbas is wrong, as most of the religious scholars consider it as sunnah of the Prophet. Most of the religious scholars, in order to rescue Islam, have to throw Ibn Abbas under the bus. This is getting ridiculous. Sahih al-Bukhari, 4496. Narrated Asim bin Sulaiman, I asked Anas bin Malik about As-Safa and Al-Marwa. Anas replied, we used to consider going around them a custom of the pre-Islamic period of ignorance. So when Islam came, we gave up going around them. Wait a minute, they didn't know about Hagar and Ishmael? Then Allah revealed, verily, As-Safa and Al-Marwa, two mountains at Mecca, are of the symbols of Allah. So it is not a sin on him who performs Hajj or Umrah pilgrimage of the house, the Kaba at Mecca. So here again, the early Muslims understood that this was a pagan practice. They said they stopped doing it when they became Muslims, and then Muhammad would bring it back and explain that it has some connection to people who aren't pagans. This is what we find over and over and over again. We find a pagan practice. Muhammad makes something up to bring the pagan practice into Islam. So what have we learned here? Well, Christmas sounds pagan to a lot of people, talking about Santa Claus and Christmas trees. Turns out we know where these things came from, and these do not have pagan origins. In Islam, the Kaba, the black stone, running back and forth between the hills of Safa and Marwa, all of these have a pagan origin, and Muhammad brings it into his religion anyway, wraps it up and pretends it's pure monotheism. So, Christmas, not pagan. Kaba, 100% pagan. Be sure to check out Mike's videos on Christmas for more.